Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Here's a little tune to help you remember. Same drive, different day. Don't you wish you were getting away? Pack your bags and come on through. Texas, Ohio, Alaska, we're up there too. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Well, I hope you like my little song. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
This is Addiction Medicine Journal Club. I'm Dr. John Keenan.
And I'm Dr. Sonya Tredici.
We believe that addiction is a disease that can be treated, and we want to help you stay up to date with the latest research that you can use in your addiction practice. The podcast offers Category 1 CME through MyCares in Michigan State University. The links for the CME are in the show notes. This week, we're going to be discussing Epic and its opioid risk tool. It's 10 p.m. on a Wednesday night, and I want more Epic. I've only been in that bad boy for like 13, 14 hours today. I'm going strong.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. Wait a minute. Wait, it's more than 14. I think I'm in hour 15 of Epicism. Here we go. No. I'm doing my math wrong now. 14.
You're delirious. You're delirious from so much Epic.
It's epic.
So epic. Oh my gosh. How are you doing, John?
Oh, I'm living the dream. Living the dream, man. How about you? What's new in your world?
Life is good. It's a beautiful spring in central Pennsylvania. You know, I feeling a little nostalgic. My youngest son is about to graduate from high school, so we're getting ready for all the senior things, prom and AP exams, graduation, final sports events, all that stuff. So starting to feel a little nostalgic. I'm a step ahead of you. You got a long time till you are in this moment that I'm in right now.
Yeah. It's funny that things do pass quick. I have 3 little girls, and my oldest is 10. And it's funny, she's so sweet, but she's a big scaredy cat. She always comes running in our room when she's scared. And I was laying in my bed the other night talking to my wife at 11 o'clock at night. I was like, Ellie hasn't been in our room for 4 months now. And I'm like, do you think that's just over now? And my wife's like, probably.
Yeah. And you didn't even know when was the last time, right?
Yeah. Although, yeah. It's nice to be able to just leave my room with my wife, though. It's better for my relationship, definitely.
Oh my gosh.
Well, that's good. I'm sure it is bittersweet. So it'd be like empty nesters, right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Are you going to get into some sort of weird hobbies or something to fill the time, like beekeeping?
My 50th birthday present to myself this year was a brand new stand-up paddleboard. So yes, I have a new hobby plan starting for this summer.
Cool. Well, that's awesome.
So yeah, I had an article I really wanted to tell you about in addiction medicine. So I think you'd think this was interesting. It's not really a brand new thing, and we've touched on this before about online gambling and sports betting. But I read this editorial in the BMJ that was titled "Online Gambling Requires Greater Government Regulation," which I agree with. But I don't really want to talk about this BMJ article. I want to talk about the article it was based on, which is a big paper from UCLA about the financial consequences of online sports betting. So it's a worldwide problem. It's not just in the U.S., but here in the U.S., it's really taken off. So in 2018, the Supreme Court ruled that states could legalize sports betting if they wanted to. So far, 39 states have legalized sports betting, and 30 of them have legalized online sports betting. So there are 9 states where you can bet on sports, but you have to bet in person, kind of at the track, or go to an OTB or something to place your bet. And then 30 states, you can do this online on your phone sports betting thing. And so these, more an economics paper, looked at the financial consequences of online sports betting when states legalized it. Now it's been, 4, 5, 6 years since all these states have come online. So basically the highlights of their paper, they showed a roughly 25% increase in bankruptcy rates. These are states who legalize sports betting, online sports betting. 25% increase in credit card delinquencies, 27% increase in auto loan delinquencies, 9% increase in debt collections, and overall 12-point average decrease in credit score. And this is just like incredible to me because this is population wide. This isn't among people who use online gambling. This is for the entire state. In terms of bankruptcies, it's about a 25% increase in bankruptcy rates. So what that means is about consumers, it's about 1 in 10,000 extra bankruptcies, or overall in the US, about 30,000 more personal bankruptcies if we were to extrapolate it to the entire US. And again, these are averages throughout the entire population, but remember that not everyone does online sports betting. It's mostly concentrated in younger men and people who have less financial resources. And many people do it safely. It's a recreational activity that doesn't lead to devastating consequences. So among those who do participate, the risk is much, much greater than these overall population risks. So I don't know. Do those numbers surprise you?
Yeah, they seem kind of high. Although the
Yeah.
12-point credit thing, that's not much of a change at all. I mean, I'm surprised about that one a little bit, but yeah, this seem incredibly high. I mean, they're relative risk, right? So, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not sure what the N is at the baseline, but
Well, right, like the bankruptcy one, it was like 1 in 10,000. So 10,000, per 10,000 people, one more person will go bankrupt in if sports betting is legalized in your state.
it is interesting. I feel like the sports betting and the online gambling, this comes up a lot, like in my general practice, like just doing routine physicals and people ages like, 18 to 50 that like they're losing money and this is a problem for them and they're asking for help about what to do. And
Yeah.
it's it can be very catastrophic, right? One weekend of bad gambling can do a lot of damage for someone.
Yep. Yeah, I as the, mother of 2 young men, I definitely told both of them never ever try it. Just don't try it. If you really wanna bet, you could, like, go to the track or something and bet
Yeah.
in person. And the thing that was interesting is states that legalized sports betting, but not online sports betting, had almost no change in these numbers. There was no increase in bankruptcies or credit card delinquencies, or if there were, it was very, very small.
So it's now online. Interesting.
It's the online that's the issue.
I think it's just too accessible, right?
Yeah. Too quick, too accessible, too many options. It just sucks your money away.
Yeah, one of my brothers, he likes to gamble, but I mean, he doesn't have any like issue with he's causing problems, but like I was like hanging out with him and he has bets going on like women's MMA fighting and then like a bowling
Yeah.
tournament. I'm like, dude, man, this is start of a problem. You're betting on a bowling tournament.
Well, and there's obviously like a human desire to gamble. I think in states where there isn't online sports betting, people get around it by using these prediction markets to sports bet, and they do prediction markets for the outcomes of sporting events, and then you can just do that, which isn't gambling technically.
Yeah.
So if anyone is in trouble with gambling, just to know that there is help available. In Pennsylvania, you can self-exclude from online gambling, so you actually can't access it, and you can exclude yourself for a period of time or forever. So I don't know what every state is, but most states have a gambling helpline. So just know if you're running into problems with gambling, there is help, and there's medication you can get from a doctor that sort of helps with impulse control and some of the symptoms of depression and anxiety that might underlie what you're going through or that are caused by what you might be going through.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've always was told before, like when I was sitting for boards, that like all states that had legalized gambling had, they had to have a self-exclusion program. Although I think so many states doing it state by state, that's not the case anymore. There are states that do not have a self-exclusion program. I was reading.
Interesting. I All I can say is the one in Pennsylvania is super nice. I actually called the Pennsylvania State Gambling Hotline for a patient. We called it together. And the operator we spoke to was super helpful, really nice, very encouraging. She gave us all kinds of resources. So it was a very positive experience.
Yeah, that's the move, right? I feel like the move is you call in the room. Like I have a
Yeah,
phone over my shoulder. I'm like, is this a problem? Let's just call right now. And that definitely is the way to do it, right?
let's do it. And I tell people, yeah, like you can just self exclude for like a year. If you decide that was a terrible idea and you really miss it, after a year, you can go back to it.
Yeah. Interesting.
John, anything you were thinking of in addiction medicine this week?
Yeah, I mean, read this article. It was that Trump signs order to accelerate access to psychedelic drug treatments, and it sounds
Hmm.
like it's from Joe Rogan's podcast, but it's actually from Reuters from 2026. And so, it's really interesting. psychedelics, I feel like I can't go anywhere without hearing about psychedelics. And I feel like I hear a lot from patients. It seems like anyone that has any vice whatsoever or any type of mental health issues, it seems like they inquire about this anymore. It's sometimes it's very surprising who asks. So Donald Trump just signed an executive order directing the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to fast track review of psychedelic drugs, and specifically the one that they're referring to the most is this ibogaine, which is available in other countries. The order also included $50 million in federal funding to research into this ibogaine as a treatment for mental health conditions. It's really been promoted, interestingly, by a lot of our, I guess I'd call them public figures. RFK Jr. has kind of really pushed this as a potential treatment for PTSD and depression. Joe Rogan, who's a podcast host, was there for the signing of this order, so he had a very strong advocacy in bringing this to the United States, or to kind of fast track this with our president.
So wait, not to interrupt. I don't listen to Joe Rogan, but I was looking at this New York Times article about the rescheduling of marijuana, which also happened this week, and Joe Rogan was involved in that too.
Yeah,
He's just like all over this. The man is getting stuff done.
sure.
Drug stuff.
It's definitely this kind of like alternative health. I mean, right? It's this kind of other health universe, which it's interesting. I'm not saying there's not something there, but certainly I think when we start bypassing our current treatments to start treatment with marijuana or psychedelics, I think that's where this could get off the rails a bit.
Yeah.
The drug is currently classified as a Schedule 1 drug by the Drug Enforcement Administration, meaning that it has no accepted medical use and a high abuse potential. The FDA commissioner had made the decision to kind of like fast track this drug as soon as summer of 2026. So basically, this was signed, and we're talking about like 4 months later, this drug could be available to patients, and to some extent it's already available in some countries, which is interesting. So like a lot of this is and a lot of our Joe Rogan influences come from like case reports and discussions where we have veterans and other people with mental health issues going to places like Mexico for treatment centers that have this ibogaine for them to be to have access to for possible treatment. And so really it seems to be like kind of like alternative health, and then actually a lot of our veterans are kind of advocating for treatment here. There's also kind of currently a bipartisan lawmakers are kind of getting together to talk about extending legislation to improve access and actually extend research even further. I think there's a lot of people that also argue that, maybe there's not enough evidence yet for this. Maybe it doesn't need a fast track. Maybe it just needs more further study. I don't know. It's just very interesting, but it's certainly something that we could see. And I would say, speaking from my addiction med practice, I am increasingly anxious about all of these other compounds coming to the market. I feel like these unstudied things are becoming a bigger part of my practice. Like I think a year ago we did a podcast on kratom, right? I
Hmm.
have kratom people issues every week now, like every
Yeah.
week in my practice now. This is a thing, and like it's still there because no one knew what they were approving, and it's still on shelves. And I don't know. I
Right.
wonder if this is going to be next. I worry about like psilocybin and hallucinogenics as well. Like the studies on that are there, but the studies are not how the studies apply these medications is not how it's being applied in real world. And I feel like we're kind of disconnecting, extrapolating too much in between.
Well, right. Like someone told me, now I don't remember who, the capitalists got a hold of it before the scientists. I mean, I am really interested in both, the psychedelics with their really interesting and different, you know, neurologic effects, and then the cannabinoids, which we don't know enough about and are everywhere in the body. But like the PR about it, the marketing of these products as health products and mental health products way outstrips the data. And if anything, they should just be, I mean, I do think they should be legal because I just don't think it's helping us to jail people for them. But I don't think they should be marketed as health products. I mean, the things with the high dose cannabis, like cannabis is a recreational product, but as we're getting better and better health data, it's really not panning out, you know? And as we're seeing more and more negative health effects, cardiovascular, especially developmental, psychiatric effects of cannabinoids, like they're not really turning out to be a health product. So I think the psychedelics are, they're trying to make them a health product, a medical product, but
It's
really
kind
they're
of
just going to be a
odd.
recreation
It
product.
it feels like if we rolled out alcohol first as an anxiety medication, and then
Right.
later on as a recreational product. I feel like that's what it feels like. And then people don't want to hear that there's harms to this. I'm sure there might be a use somewhere. I just wonder, is this going to now be people bypassing like safe and true and tried treatments like therapy and SSRIs to go straight to stuff like this? I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a handful of people to really make this a problem, right? It doesn't take many docs opening up clinics, doing the wrong thing to kind of really drill one of these in.
Right. Ah, well, interesting. I think this will be a really interesting development in our kind of professional lifetime. We'll go from it being villainized and, Nancy Reagan to just everywhere, considered a health item. So you ready to hear more about Epic now that we digressed from Epic for like
Yeah.
5 minutes?
Yeah.
You're so excited, I can tell. All right. So this article is not about treating addiction, and rarely do we deviate, but Epic is such a dominant force in most lives of doctors that I had to do it. And for anyone who conceivably doesn't know what Epic is, who's listening, it's an electronic medical record product. It's the most successful and the most widely used electronic medical record software. Over half of all patients in the US, I don't even know the number now. Last time I looked, it was more than half, have their medical records in Epic. So it's really everywhere and it includes a lot of different tools. And one of the tools is an opioid abuse and opioid overdose risk model. So this study is called External Validation of Epic's Risk of Opioid Abuse and Overdose Model Among Primary Care Physicians in 3 Health Systems, published in the Journal of General Internal Medicine. This risk model was developed in 2019. It's something called a cognitive computing model, and it was developed to identify patients at risk of opioid use disorder or overdose within 12 months. They call the score the risk of opioid abuse, which is stigmatizing language, or overdose, or otherwise known as the opioid risk score. The opioid risk score uses a logistic regression to model predicting whether a patient who does not have a diagnosis of opioid use disorder will be diagnosed with opioid use disorder or will experience an opioid overdose in the next year. So basically, the computer runs a score on your chart and says, if you don't have opioid use disorder now, what's your risk of developing it or having an overdose in the next 12 months? So, not too hard to understand what it's trying to do. However, it hasn't been externally validated, which is critical because populations, they develop it on a certain population, but it doesn't mean the model will work beyond that initial data set. It was tested for clinical utility. So there's been some trials. If you give docs the data from the model, is it helpful clinically? And they've used it to say that you should identify patients who should be offered screening, brief intervention, and treatment for opioid use disorder. And this was sort of a sub-study of that parent trial that tested the model. So PCPs were given outcomes of the opioid risk score. Um, and the model did increase treatment with naloxone. So patients with a high score got prescriptions for naloxone and some of them did get treatment for opioid use disorder, but it didn't really increase the diagnosis of opioid use disorder compared to just usual care where you do your usual screening. And, of note, St. Max's was offered the opioid risk tool, and we in our health system declined to take it. We didn't like it because it seemed like a black box. It was a proprietary model that we couldn't examine the nuts and bolts of. And there were some serious limitations to the model that I'll get into as we discuss this paper. So before we talk about it, John, do you think that this is a good idea? Would you like it if Epic gave you a score, like from 1 to 100, how likely your patient is to have opioid use disorder in the next year or develop it in the next year?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel conflicted about this. I feel like it could be interesting to see who's at risk. Although, I mean, by definition, it's you. I'd like to walk in the room and like assess each individual person for who they are and let them kind of tell me who they are and like our relationship guides that. And I also feel like as a primary care doc, I feel like I always assume and believe everything a patient tells me, and then it's up to them to prove to me that maybe they're not kind of I hate to use the word trustworthy, but that there's more of an issue here than is. So I like to just ask them honestly
Right.
rather than rely on an external validation. And I'll do that with these medicines as is, right? I'll say, you have severe pain. I'm considering giving you a brief course of like this medicine's an opioid.
Yeah.
Do you think that would be a problem for you? And I leave it open ended like that. And I think I like to involve patients in this decision and them to make the decisions for themselves instead of me being like paternalistic, which this could
Yeah.
introduce. Does that make sense? Did I articulate that or do I sound crazy?
We don't give our patients enough credit sometimes. You can just ask them what they think. And if you can clearly explain the options, usually they can tell you which one will work best for them. The other problem is that in these models that predict opioid use disorder, a lot of the factors that go into it are also sort of stigmatized groups. So race, gender, age, history of incarceration, history of prior opioid use. It sort of pulls out these marginalized groups, and then those are the ones who are higher risk for a whole bunch of factors. And the reason these scores make me anxious is they're not actually probably used to decide who you should offer screening to. They're used to decide who you should not prescribe opioids to. That's really how they're used in clinical practice. So even though Epic doesn't say that's what they're for. So just a few, fundamental metrics of a clinical prediction model. In case everybody forgot med school, there's sensitivity, specificity, positive predictive value, and negative predictive value. So sensitivity is, you know, the proportion of positives that it will pick up. So a very sensitive test will pick up everybody who has the disease. There's very few false negatives. If it says you don't have it, you probably don't have it. It picks up everyone who has it. Specificity is the proportion of negatives identified. So a test with high specificity means that if it chooses you, you definitely have the disease, but it might miss some people. There's very few false positives with a high specificity test. And then positive predictive value says what proportion of the cases identified at risk are true cases, and negative predictive value is what proportion of cases that are said not to have the disease do truly not have the disease. So how well does it predict the negatives? So just a quick review. All right, clinical question in this study. So this was a prospective cohort study to externally validate Epic's opioid risk score in the outpatient primary care. So this is the external validation of their study. They have this model. They don't tell us what's in it. They tested it on their own data set of patients, and then they sell it. And this group took the model. They still don't know what's in the model, but they took it, they ran it on a bunch of charts to see what the risk score is, and then they saw if those patients did indeed go on to live out the risk as predicted by the model. So the population was a big group of patients, 704,764 patients. So over 700,000 patients, all adults. They had some kind of primary care encounter during the study period, which was 2021 to 2022. And they did not have an opioid use disorder at the index appointment or 12 months prior. They extracted the data from, you guessed it, Epic. Demographics, it was from 92 different primary care clinics. 75% of patients were white. They were all adult ages, 56% women, 15% had Medicaid, and 0.4% were considered high risk in this score. So most people in general primary care are not high risk, according to the Epic opioid risk score. They excluded people in nursing homes, hospice, or who had active cancer. So the researchers don't know the exact elements in the opioid risk score. It does include things like demographics, social and family history, diagnoses, active problems, medications, healthcare utilization, but they don't know the exact model. And, just to get a sense again of like who's high risk, or how high risk people are, different subgroups had different risk scores. So wait, I'm just pulling up my little chart here. I won't belabor these numbers, but I thought they were kind of interesting. So highest risk groups, Native Americans, unfortunately, a group that suffers a lot. Patients on Medicaid had a risk score of 8.7, whereas patients who didn't have Medicaid had a risk score of 4.8. And then one site, which had more patients at risk, had a higher risk score than the other sites. But overall, most patients, and this risk score, I think, I've heard if it goes from like 1 to 100, had risk scores about 3, 4, 5. The higher risk ones were more like 8 or 9. So most people were very low risk in this study. So that's kind of the setup. Before we talk about the clinical question, John, any thoughts or comments on what Epic is trying to do with their risk score?
No, I seem like I kind of understand it, even though that the risk score itself is still kind of nebulous, it seems like.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a black box for us. So this is a binary outcome variable. You had two choices. It's whether a patient was diagnosed with opioid use disorder or experienced an opioid overdose within 12 months of the index date. So they looked at the distribution of Epic's opioid risk score across all the demographic groups. They looked to see how the score performed in terms of sensitivity, specificity, negative predictive value, and positive predictive value when they looked at what actually happened to the patient. And then they looked at something called the discrimination using what's called a C statistic, range from zero point 0.5, meaning it's random, to 1, meaning it perfectly discriminates between the two groups. And when you're doing a study like this, you can get a C score of like 0.7 to zero point 0.8 is considered acceptable. Anything greater than zero point 0.8 is considered excellent. So it's like, how good a job does it do separating patients into the two risk groups, high risk and low risk? And then they assessed calibration using a regression, comparing the observed versus the predicted outcome rates. So that's like how close the risk predicted by the model is to the real life risk. So basically, they just ran the model and then they waited and saw what happened to the patients after the model was run to see whether the model was correct or not. So definitely some strengths and limitations. And someone pointed out when we presented this to our live group, there was a lot of limitations, but mostly these are limitations of the EPIC model, not limitations of the study. Like the study itself is good. I actually didn't really have any, there weren't a lot of limitations of the study, but just in general, strengths are it was very large, over 700,000 patients in 3 health systems and over 2,000 primary events. It was broad demographics. It included some clinical utility data, not just the model validation. And it was independently funded. This was not funded by Epic. It was funded by the NIDA research. In terms of weaknesses, the outcome was relatively rare. As I said, patients were mostly low risk. So achieving adequate sensitivity and positive predictive value is hard if the outcome is rare. There are some very important predictors and known predictors of opioid use disorder that aren't captured in the model because they're not captured in the EMR. So housing status, history of incarceration are two I could think of, and there's others. Family history probably is captured, but not reliably. They had a composite outcome in the risk score, which is both opioid overdose and opioid use disorder, which are not equivalent. And then the biggest problem is like they excluded patients who already have opioid use disorder. So those are the highest risk patients, the ones who already have a problem. And those are excluded from the model. So if you're using this model as the only way to decide whether or not someone has opioid use disorder or is at risk, I should say, I take that back. If the model is helping you decide who's at risk, and then it eliminates the people who are at the highest risk, and you don't somehow know that they have opioid use disorder, it could lead you astray into a false sense of security. There's a bit of a black box. And because it's an EMR study, it depends on coding accuracy. And if there are events, especially addiction related events that happen outside the health system, they won't be included or captured. 2 other limitations. 1 year might be a little short, for risk. And the final one is that the training data that they used to develop the models out of date. So the training data is from 2015 to 2018, but there's a shifting drug landscape and data from 2018, before 2018 ends up not being super relevant today. So those are some strengths and limitations of this data. You ready to hear about the results? All right. So in general, most patients had a low risk score. 99.6% had a low risk score. 0.4% had the high risk score. So you just got a score, it was either low or high. The opioid use disorder diagnosis or overdose in the 12-month follow-up period was rare. So it was 0.3%. So again, not something that happened a lot in this general population. The model overall had very poor sensitivity. It correctly picked up 185 of the 2,362 patients who experienced the event. So that gives a sensitivity of 0.0783, which is not good at all. So very non-sensitive. It missed a lot of cases. It did have pretty good specificity. So it correctly classified people who were low risk. Almost all the people it said were low risk were indeed low risk. But this might be a factor of the low incidence of the primary outcome in the population. So, of course, if you pick someone even at random, they're not likely to have the outcome because it's so uncommon. So it had good specificity. It correctly identified people most often who didn't have a high risk for opioid use disorder. That gives it, and related is the positive and negative predictive value, had very poor positive predictive value. a very good negative predictive value. So if it said a patient was low risk, most likely they were low risk. If it said a patient was high risk, mm, it if it said a patient was high risk, it 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 might have picked them up, but it missed many, many high risk people. So good negative predictive value, poor positive predictive value. So that's the validation of this model. So in terms of patient care, you could use this score to decide who to screen for opioid use disorder, and that's what this data was actually used for in the parent study that this data came out of. So if someone had a high risk score, you could give them naloxone, you could screen them for opioid use disorder, you could offer them treatment. It would be slightly better than screening no one, but most patients flagged by the opioid risk score would be false positives. So you would spend a lot of time screening people and talking to them about opioid use disorder, even though they weren't going to go on to develop it. So it would probably cause a lot of work without necessarily doing much good for you. So I don't think this model will help us in patient care. And I really don't think it's a good model for deciding who to prescribe opioids to. So I don't know. I'm glad we're not using the opioid risk score. I think it's super interesting concept though. And I'm really glad that these people did this validation because this is a tool that's deployed pretty widely among health systems. And it wasn't externally validated before it was deployed. So I don't know. What do you think of the opioid risk score, John, after seeing this paper on the validation?
I mean, it's interesting. If we were to kind of put this in the lens of another item, though, it's tough because, like, I think these EMR risk tools, I mean, they're really looking for like a negative predictive value, right? I can think of the one at the hospital, for example, that fires all the time is sepsis, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, no one ever like, the percentage of people that have sepsis, that fires would actually have sepsis, it's small, but we never miss sepsis,
Right.
right? And the same with this one, I think it's very similar that, like, when it doesn't fire, it's very useful, but with it fires, it's like a pause for you to think about it. So I think that's kind of interesting. I think the only difference I feel from this, from like the sepsis one, is that, sepsis isn't kind of like a stigmatized condition,
Yeah.
unlike this, which it is. I feel like really the issue is not necessarily the tool or how it's designed. It's just like it's applying this to like a sensitive topic, right?
Right. Well, right. And it's not totally clear that the intervention that would come would save lives after you get your high opioid risk score.
Yeah.
But I think basically, I just feel like with the poor sensitivity, like it basically missed most patients who were going to have an event. It didn't fire too often. It just like didn't fire often enough, you know?
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the EMR is here to stay. I think it can be a tool. I think if I get flagged one more time to stop and prescribe a statin to someone that's just refusing for the 900th time, I might tell the computer at this point.
Just have to you have to tell your patient, you have to be like, "Can I just write it down and you and I can agree secretly that you're not gonna fill it? I'm just gonna put it on your med list." You could like, "Do come on, man, just for me, can I put this down?"
I can't look at myself in the mirror after doing something like that.
I don't know, man. Those
It's false. It's false. It's false statin honor.
those quality metrics are breathing down your neck. I I don't talk about my quality metrics with my patients because I don't want them to feel like their care is compromised by that, but, a portion of our salaries, like most doctors, are based on quality metrics, and occasionally patients ask me about it, and I tell them the truth. I'm like, "Yeah, part of my salary is based on whether or not you get your mammogram." And they're horrified, and then they're like, "I'll sign up right away. I'm so sorry."
I had the sweetest, okay, and this is totally not addiction. I had the sweetest message from a patient the other day. The portal is also an epic. You get so many messages, and some of them can be soul sucking. But I had a lady that every year at her physical, I've talked to her about getting a mammogram, and she does not believe in in my kind of medicine, like mainstream medicine.
Uh-huh.
And every year, I got this kind of like talk, but every year I brought it up again. And she got her mammogram, and she has breast
Oh
cancer.
my gosh.
And I got a very nice letter from her about that she appreciates that I never gave up on her, even though she gave me such a hard time for like 5 years to get that
Oh my
thing.
god, is she gonna be okay, do you think? Was it caught soon enough?
I think so. I think so. It actually, but yeah, it's funny. So I think that it's just like children, right? You think they're not listening, but they are.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for listening to this somewhat technical presentation about epic risk prediction models.
I would love audience feedback on this one. Like, what do people think about like a risk prediction tool in the
Yeah.
EMR? I'm sure that some people probably maybe disagree with this and think it would be useful. I think it's an interesting discussion, almost like an ethics discussion, more so than a journal club discussion, right?
Yeah, and if anyone has this in their health system, because we don't have it, so I don't really know what it looks like in practice. And let us know how you like it.
Well, thank you for listening to the Addiction Medicine Journal Club. The best part of any journal club is the conversation, and we want to hear what you have to say. To have your opinions about the articles included in a future episode, send us your comments on social media, email us, or join a Facebook group. The links are in the show notes. Original theme music was composed and performed by Benjamin Kennedy, audio editing by Michael Bonanno, CME support from My Cares, produced by Dr. Patrick Beeman and Ars Longa Media. Addiction Medicine Journal Club is intended for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. The views expressed here are our own and do not necessarily reflect those of our employers or the authors of the articles we review. All patient information has been modified to protect their identities. Thank you for being part of the conversation and have a great day.